Hey guys, in this video I'll show you how you can capture and process images of the closest star, our Sun. I thought this might be a good idea, as I've already made a video explaining how to build your own solar filter. A link to that video is in the top right corner. If it isn't clear already, you will need a solar filter when imaging the Sun with a telescope, as you will otherwise destroy your optics. Alright, so when it comes to setting up your telescope, you will want to make sure you get a rough polar alignment. This is no problem if you have a permanent setup for your mount. However, if you don't, that's also no problem. Just roughly pointing it towards Polaris should get you a good enough polar alignment. This is because when imaging the Sun, we will work with really short exposure times, and therefore it doesn't matter too much if the Sun drifts slowly. Additionally, you can always reposition your telescope whilst imaging, and it won't impact the quality of your pictures. Now I will say this again, before you slew your telescope towards the Sun, don't forget to put on your solar filter and also make sure that the dust cover is on the finder scope. Okay, so I can now slew to the Sun, and it should appear in my camera any moment now. There it is. So it is very important to set your exposure time very low, otherwise your whole screen will just be white. For me, 0.5 milliseconds works fine right now. The gain on your camera should be set as low as possible for imaging. Now, when it comes to focusing, you obviously can't use a Bahtinov mask, as I would recommend to when you're imaging during the night. So you now have two options. You can either use a Bahtinov mask in a previous night and then not move your camera or focuser at all, or you can now zoom in on the Sun and adjust your focus then. For me, the focus is already very good, so I won't change it anymore, but you should really try and nail the focus to get the best results possible. As you can see, I can't image the whole Sun at once with my setup. That's why I'll have to settle for just a part of the Sun to image for now. I chose the lower part of the Sun, however you have to know that I'm using a Newtonian telescope, so with the image being flipped, I'm actually imaging the top half of the Sun right now. Okay, just to go over my settings quickly, I'm now using an exposure time of 0.1 milliseconds and a gain of 0. I've selected 20,000 frames for the capture, however I will cancel the imaging at around 1000 frames, because it takes quite a long time to save all these frames. Please also note that I'm currently saving the frames as single PNG files, however it often is more convenient to save them as an AVI file. Okay, so just as a quick tip, if you want to know if it's worth imaging the Sun right now, you can go to this website, Space Weather Live. I've linked this website in the description. And you can then go to solar activity and real-time solar activity, and you'll get this picture right here. And this is like a more or less live view of the Sun. So if you were to image the Sun right now, these are the spots you could see right now, and then you can decide if it's worth imaging the Sun right now. So this is just a really useful website. Okay, so now that we've recorded the Sun, and we have our pictures or our AVI file, we can open AutoStakkert. I've linked that in the description as well. And you'll have to click on Open, and then either select your AVI file, and for me I'll have to go to Image Files and select all of these, and then say Open. Now we'll have one picture right here in this frame. And we can also go through all of these frames with this slider up here. And we see that the Sun moved quite a bit in my footage, but that's totally fine. I'll just go back to the start. Okay, so we'll go over to this other window now. And we'll start here with the image stabilization. So we have a solar recording, so we'll use surface. And I would recommend that you use the improved tracking, and with expand or cropped. In my recording the Sun moves quite a bit, so I'll go with expand, and you can always cut off the edges later. And with cropped I would just get a really small picture. So I'll go with expand, and I would leave the quality estimator as it is right now. Leave this on local and then hit analyze. Okay, so it's now finished with analyzing our images, and we can now go to stacking the images. So once again, in this window right here, we have all our frames, and you can see now that they're all like stabilized, so you can see the edges moving, but everything inside the red frame you can see is captured within every single picture. Okay, so back to the other window. I would recommend to use the double stack reference because this generally gives better results, and use the auto size. Okay, so now to the output file. I always use the TIFF option, but you can of course also use PNG or FIT, but for me TIFF works best. And now to the quality graph in the middle of this window right here. So here we can see the average quality of the frames. So we can see that around 25% of the total frames, so like the total frames would be in the x-axis, the quality is down to around 50%. So when we now select a percentage of frames to stack, we can go with 10, and I'll also go with 20. You could also go with 25% here. That's really up to you. It often doesn't make much of a difference, but you can experiment with this value a bit and see what results you get. So what you're doing with these percentages here, you're essentially doing two different stacks now. So I'll get one result with 10% of the frames stacked and one result with 20% of the frames stacked. It will of course take the best 20% of the total frames. So if we look at this right here, we can say like 20% is right here in the x-axis, and everything left of that has a better quality. So all of these frames will be stacked in this 20% image. Now we don't want this sharpened option. We'll do the sharpening ourselves later. We do want the RGB align, and you can opt to save it in folders, but I usually don't do that. Now you have this free field. I've just put in sun. You can put in whatever or just leave it empty. That's up to you. And now we have the drizzle option. If you've taken your photos the way I've taken them, you won't need this option, and you can just leave it on off, which is also recommended. So now we'll have to go to the other window right here, and we'll have to set alignment points. Now we have a few options right here, so we can set the alignment point size and the minimal brightness. So if you put the minimal brightness too low, let's say we put that at 0, and we hit place alignment point grid, it will now be placing all these points, and you can see they're also in this black part, so in the dark part of the frame where there isn't even any sun. So that obviously doesn't make any sense. So we'll have to tune that up a bit. I had it on 20, so I'll just go with 20 and see how that works. And the size, you can see that they're around 104 now, but I have this multi-scale option ticked, so the size will vary a bit. So some of them will be larger and some will be smaller, but maybe we'll just go down with the size a bit, and as I said, put the brightness to around 20 and see how that works, and we'll just say place the grid now. Okay, so that already looks much better. We now don't have any alignment points in the dark areas, and only on the sun where we actually want them. It's still quite a few alignment points, so like almost 6,000. So maybe we'll just go up to 104 and place again and see how many points we get now. Okay, so now we're at 2,000 points. So I think that's quite a bit better, and we'll leave it at that. And that normally works fine. So you don't have to worry too much about these alignment points. If you turn up the minimal brightness far enough that it doesn't place them in the black parts of your image, and if you don't have too many alignment points, everything should work just fine. So we can go back to the other window here, and with everything set and done, we can hit stack, and now we'll have to wait for quite a bit. Okay, so it's just finished stacking now, and we've got two pictures. I'll open them really quickly. So we have the first one right here, and the second one in just a second. So there we go. We now have the 10% one on the left and the 20% on the right. So you see this in the P20 is 20% and P10 is 10%. Now these two look really similar, and it often helps if we zoom in on a sunspot. So we'll do that on this one. As you can see, there's really not much of a difference. Okay, so I'll close them, and we can also close AutoStakkert. And I'll now open RegiStax. A link to that is in the description. So here I'll also say select, and we have our picture right here. So we'll go with the 10% one for now. And you can say show full image, then you see the whole thing. Okay, so now we of course see these edges. So we've got the yellow up here that looks really weird, but this is because we selected the expand version in AutoStakkert, and if we crop the image later, we won't have the problem with these edges. Alright, so now that we see the whole image, we can go to View Zoomed, and we get the zoom panel. And if you hit Control and move your mouse to a sunspot, you can see that up close. We see that we have this yellow part right here and the blue part up there, and it really doesn't look clean. And for that we have the RGB Align tool. So when you open that, you can now adjust the X and Y position of the red and blue layer. For this one, I think we have to go up with the blue layer, and you can see how it changes in the zoom panel. It looks quite a bit better already now. So maybe 15, 16, I think that's around where it works for this one. So you'll have to experiment a bit with this. You can also use the estimate button down here, then the program will try to do it by itself, but I found that it really doesn't work that well, so I just do it manually. Now the X position looks quite good, and it's just the Y position that needs to be adjusted, I think. And I guess that like 15, 16, I think I'll go for 15. That looks quite good, and we can close that window again. Okay, so you can see now that it's just in this area, this effect, and we of course want to apply it to the whole image. So you go up here and hit Do All, and you can see now we lose the yellow edge at the top. And we have this sunspot in black and white, you could say, so no longer yellow and blue. And we also lose this very blue edge at the bottom. So it looks a lot better color-wise now, and now we'll have to sharpen the image. For that you can also again use the View Zoomed, and let me just go to this one again. Okay, so now we have these wavelets. You can get to that by clicking wavelet up here, and we have these 6 layers, and with these layers we'll try to sharpen the image as much as possible, but also not make it look too grainy. I normally start by going up with this layer to maybe around 60, and you can instantly see how it changed this in the zoom panel. So if I go back and forth, you can see how it's changed that. And we now also have this sharpen and denoise button. So if we go on sharpen a bit, it gets sharper, but it also gets a lot grainier. So you don't want to overdo it here. And maybe tune down this a bit. And you can also use this denoise function to make it look less grainy. Now here, again, it is very much experimenting and testing what works for this picture, what works for you, and you have to see and test what gets the best results for you. And if we look to the right here, you can see that we've applied this in this rectangle here, So this sunspot is sharp and the other ones of course aren't. You can see which area you're currently working on by show processing area by clicking that up here. You can see it's now marked this, and you can also move that by just clicking somewhere. So if I click over here, you can now see I have this rectangle over there, or if I go down here, I have it down there. But of course I want to keep it on this big sunspot right now because that's one where we can see the sharpness the best. So we'll work on this one and then later apply it to the whole image. So just test around now with the wavelets, see what works, and again, this is really up to you. Just test it out, see what works for you, and with which settings you get the best results. So it is in this stage of the image processing where you can really make the difference, where you can really decide how you want your final picture to look, but you really don't want to overdo it, because if we look into this area right here, you can see it starts to get very grainy and it just doesn't give off a good look in the end. So we really want to keep a balance here between making the sunspot look sharp, but also not making the surface of the sun look kind of weird. Alright, so I think I'm quite happy with the sunspot and how it looks right now, and it's also like the surface of the sun is not too grainy, so it's okay how it looks right now. We can close that and again hit do all. Now you'll instantly notice that the edges look really corrupt, but again, this is no problem. We will just have to crop the image later, so we'll lose a bit of image, but that's okay. So this is the first time that we see the whole sun now sharpened, and it looks quite good, but you can also see, I don't know how good it will be in the YouTube video, but down here it looks like there's almost a grid in the sun, so quite possibly we've gone too far with the layers, so we might want to readjust a little, and this is up to personal preference. So if you look at it from up close, maybe I can get the zoomed in view here. Again, I don't know how well you'll be able to see it in the YouTube video, but it looks to be like there's a grid pattern on the sun, so you want to avoid that. But if you look at it as a picture in the whole, it really doesn't show that much, so I think that'll be fine. And I'll stick with this picture as it is right now. Another option you have, and I might actually use it here, is the denoise option. You can find that over there in the functions. And if we now, so we'll select, like, again by clicking an area. If we set this denoise to 0, you can, let's go down here, you can kind of still see this grid pattern. And if we now turn that up to maybe around 100, it already gets a little less, so maybe like 200. So you can really like tune that a bit and see if that works for you, if that works for your picture. So maybe like around 400 is pretty good. I'll just go down here because we've had quite the pattern down here. That's also a little bit better already. So you can test if this works for you, and maybe even more here. But again, maybe I'll go with this view for this and just set that back on this one. So if we compare the denoising with 600 to absolutely 0 denoising, you can see that we will lose some of the sharpness. So it's really like a compromise between what you want the surface of the sun to look like and how sharp you want your sunspots to look like. So I think I'll go for something around 600, maybe like a little less, 500 something, around 500 maybe, and I'll just have a smoother surface of the sun now, and the grid pattern won't be as aggressive, you could say. Okay, so now that I'm finished with processing my image, I can go to Save Image, and I'll just name this underscore RegiStax and hit Save. Now we can compare these two pictures. Let me just pull that up. So we have, this is the original picture, and this is the new one now. So we have on the right the picture that we got from AutoStakkert. We still have this disalignment of the color layers, and if we go over here, the colors are aligned, and we of course have a much sharper sunspot. And for example, if you look at this small patch down here, you can barely see it in this picture, and here it's pretty clear. So quite the improvement. And you can now crop this image with whatever software you like, just to get rid of the edges. And I'll do that in the software right here. So just select this area, just to cut off the edges, and there we go. So now we have quite a nice picture of a part of the sun, and it would of course be pretty cool if we had a picture of the whole sun, and there is of course a way you can do that. Now I've gone ahead and imaged the sun in one day, but I've made different recordings of different parts of the sun, and I'll just pull up these images now. So we can just save this one, and we can close RegiStax, and I'll pull up the other pictures. Okay, so now I have all the images open, and we can now just quickly go through them. So we have this, you could say, bottom one here. We have this one, another one, and one at the top. So we have these 6 pictures, which were all taken as I showed you, and they were all processed the same way. And this is quite important, that you process them the same way to make them look very similar, so that you don't have a different amount of sharpness in one picture and the other one is a little noisier, and in the end that would make the overall picture look really weird. So it's important that you do the same processing on every single one of your images. So once you've done that, and once you have all of your pictures of the sun ready, you can open a software like GIMP or any other kind of image editing software. And in the software you want to open all of your images. Okay, so here we have GIMP, and in here we can now import our 6 pictures. There we go. And I'll just zoom out a bit. So now we have these 6 pictures, and what we want to do is create a new picture. Now you'll have to input the image size, and I'll go for, not too sure, but you can make it quite large, doesn't really matter. So I go for 6000, and with the background color, that's okay, and create that. Now we have a white background, that's not ideal, I'd say, so we'll just use the fill tool and fill that in black. Okay, so now we can go to all of these other pictures and import them into this one right here. So there we go, that's the first one, second one, third, fourth. You can already kind of like sort them in the way that they're going to be arranged later. Just the last 2, so that one goes there, and the last one. Okay, so there we go. Now we have all of our pictures here in one big picture, you could say. I'll just zoom out quickly, and you'll now want to just kind of start with one picture. So you could say you can start from the top, and then you'll work your way down. So we can just hide all of the other pictures. Oh, that was exactly the wrong way, so we'll do it the other way. There we go. Okay, so now we've hidden all the other ones. Now let's just zoom in on these 2. And we'll now want to make sure that they overline perfectly. And to do that, I'll actually just sort them the other way around. So we have this one on top now, and the other one below it. And when you go on this layer here, you can change the opacity, so the transparency, and you can make that quite a bit transparent, maybe like 40–50%. And then go to this other layer and just kind of move it over the other one. So now we can see that these sunspots align quite well already. So depending on how we have the opacity here, it's now at 0, and when we turn that up to 100, you can see that the sunspots barely move, so they are pretty well aligned. I'll just leave that at 40 now, and we can zoom out and like go to this one down here. Maybe we can see it here as well. So if I'm on this layer and I move this layer, I'll just use the arrow key so that we can move it in small increments. And you can now see that we want to align this as good as we can. So I think this should be quite good now. And when we zoom out and get the opacity back on and select another layer, you can almost not see a difference here. So you can't really see an edge anywhere, and it aligns really well. And this is why it's important to have the same processing on every single one of your images, because if you don't, then you'll be able to see some edges here and it will look really weird. So I'll just go ahead and do that for every single picture now and have them all line up. Okay, so now that I've finished, you can pretty much no longer see where the single images start and where they end, so it looks pretty good. And we can now just like select a rectangle around this, so let's just go something like this and go to image and crop to selection, and there we go. Okay, so select none, and there we have it. A beautiful picture of the whole sun. Alright, so I hope you learned something in this video. I hope you now understand how you can capture and process images of the sun. And I wish you the very best when you try for yourself. Now, if you found this video helpful in any way, I'd really appreciate if you give this video a like. If you still have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments, and I will try to help you out as best as I can. So thanks very much for watching, clear skies, and bye.